Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to talk about symbolism of the second house or Bhava, as it's known as in Sanskrit, and this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective. So let's go ahead. I have a bunch of teaching videos on Vedic astrology or Jyotish. You can find them all on my concepts playlist. Whenever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means that there's a teaching video on that subject. And if you're new to Vedic astrology, you might check out these videos listed here before this one so that you get more out of it. But North, South, East Indian style charts, introduction to navigating a birth chart, introduction to the constellations or Rashis, the Lagna, Ascendant, Rising sign, or first house. And this video is actually part of a growing list of videos in my houses or Bhavas playlist. So I'll be going through the houses in future talks. All right, so the second house, and you can see here in the chart on the right, this is a North Indian style chart, and this lavender triangle in the upper left of the chart, that's the second house. So the first house is the first diamond at the top of the chart, and then you count counterclockwise with North Indian style charts. So if you're trying to figure out where the second house is, that's it. So again, Bhava is Sanskrit for house, so I typically use house or Bhava in my talks. Um, and the second house is considered or another name for the second house in Sanskrit is a Dana Sthana. Dana means wealthy, so and Sthana means house, so wealthy house or house of wealth, yeah. The other thing to note about the second house here um, is that the second house in the natural zodiac, and the chart I have on the right is the natural zodiac. The natural zodiac is where the first constellation of the zodiac, meaning Aries or Mesha in Sanskrit, is lined up with the first house. So just make sure that you don't confuse first house with first constellation or second house, second constellation, because they're actually two different layers of information. Okay, but since we're looking at in this chart the natural zodiac, where Aries, the first constellation, is in the first house, the second constellation of the zodiac is Taurus. And so Taurus is a constellation that indicates fixed, it's a fixed sign, it's also an earth sign. And if you don't know what those terms mean, fixed and earth, I actually have a video on that subject. So I would look at my constellation classifications video that I just did, I think last week, so that you understand more of what that means. But so there's a lot of fixed signs in general have this notion of being very kind of practical, tangible, pragmatic. And earth signs are also earthy, tangible. So there's a lot of very tangible, um, kind of material type energy related to this house. Okay. The second house or bhava is also considered an artastana, and arta means also is means basically the motivation of an artastana is that it's the motivation for building wealth. Yeah. So again, we have all these different, it's called the wealth house, the house of wealth. We have Taurus, which is fixed earth sign, energy kind of deeply underlying the energy of this house, and it's also the second house is also called Artistana. So it's pretty clear. Second house is pretty clear what it's about. The other thing that may not be so obvious is that the second house is also called Marakastana. Maraka means death, and so actually this is one of the houses that's evaluated when looking at longevity and or health problems, but typically longevity. If there are problems going on with the second house, it may not affect longevity, but it might affect health. So there might be some strains of health when the second house is challenged for somebody. All right. So let's get into more specific indications for the second house. So if we're talking about health, and you can see I have here main categories for the second house. So health, mouth, family, money, enemies are it. Those are the main categories, but let's talk about each one. So if we're talking about health, or if we're looking at health for somebody, the second house is related to basically um, face, head, neck. Okay. So eyesight, for example, is related to the second house, specifically the right eye. Also the face, the nose, the mouth, everything in the mouth, so teeth, tongue, and then the throat. And then we also can look at like sort of the facial luster, if somebody's sort of bright and radiant through their face and head. Also the finger and toenails. Okay, so those are the things related to health in the second house. So mouth, so we already got kind of head, face, neck from the health category here, but there's more to do with the mouth. So specifically, this house is related to communication and even more specifically, oral communication. So not necessarily written communication. So speech in general. So if there are very strong, positive, well-conditioned planets in this house, generally somebody will be a great speaker, orator, maybe a singer, that sort of thing. Okay. Also related to mouth and speech is the ability to fulfill promises, because again, speeches are a way of making kind of verbal contracts, yeah, with people, even if they seem slight or minute in the day to day or something like, oh, I'll pick you up at 3 o'clock. That's still a promise, So again, that has to do with the condition of the Lord of the house as well as the planets associated with the house. And also, since we're talking about the mouth here, things that people eat, drink, food in general, the 9 grains, if you're looking at that from the Indian tradition. The other big category associated with the second house is family. So this includes not just sort of nuclear family, but extended family. So cousins, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, that sort of thing. And even people who are close to the native of the chart. So it might be friends who are like family, that sort of thing. And other things related to family, like sacred traditions, often sacred traditions are passed through families. Not always, but sometimes. And also education, but specifically education related to what do you learn as a child? What are the people around you teaching you? So this isn't formal education necessarily. That's typically more of like a fourth house thing, like even grade school up to about college. But this is more, for example, I looked at Abraham Lincoln's chart. I think he was the 16th president of the United States. And he didn't actually have much formal education, but he ended up becoming a lawyer. But his second house was tremendously strong. And he was a famous orator. He was a famous lawyer. He was a famous president for the speeches that he gave. And most of the learning that he did, he basically taught himself, or he had, I think, family who would give him books and stuff like that. So it was just this kind of informal education through his childhood. But he, I think, up until the age of 16 or something, he only formally went to school for 1 or 2 years, which is pretty amazing. So just as an example of what the second house can give. Also related to family, again, related to education or sort of childhood and formal education as a child and through the family is, knowledge or street smart knowledge. So, things we learn through family, like maybe you learn cooking, or maybe you learn sewing, or maybe you learn farming through your family, but you don't actually go to school and sit in front of in a classroom for that. But also knowledge, more mundane, practical knowledge that's useful. Yeah. So, then there's a big category here of money, and there's a lot here. So, income through self or friends, liquid assets, movable possessions. So, something bigger like it's movable, obviously, like a car. The car is usually associated with the fourth house. But maybe furniture as long as it's not too large, but houses and cars and stuff would be related to the fourth house because they're bigger. Savings, so your bank account. Your balance in your bank account, and other things related to wealth. So things like precious metals, horses, that's how they list it in the Shastra traditional, what is it, traditional text of Jyotish. But horses nowadays it could be livestock if you're a farmer, because that's a lot of, horses and cows and things are very expensive and they are a form of wealth. But typically horses would be associated with vehicles. So nowadays it might be more, most people have cars, not so many people have how, horses and cows, but also boats or trucks or that sort of thing. Also, somebody's level of generosity. That's also associated here with this house. And other forms of money or wealth, or at least kind of demonstration of wealth, are things like clothes, robes, so maybe uniforms for work, also jewels and perfumes. These are all kinds of signs and symbols of wealth, and also what people might notice about you, because again, we're talking about head, face, neck. So things like jewels are typically worn. A lot of them are worn like on the earlobes and the neck and that sort of thing. Um, Although they can be worn in other parts of the body. And also perfumes are related to the nose. And those are also like perfumes are a luxury item as well as jewels, right? So these aren't subsistence level typically items for people. Um, and also this house is related to things that support you just after birth, so in childhood. So again, this kind of is a bridge to, family and money, um, in terms of what sort of things supported you. Yeah. Um, when you were more vulnerable and, not able to go get a job, although some children go get jobs fairly young. Um, The other thing is that when you see planets placed here in the second house, that's usually an indication, those planets are usually indicating sources of gains in somebody's life. So maybe if you have Jupiter in the second house, Jupiter is the planet of oration. So probably speech, unless maybe the second house you had Capricorn in the second house because Jupiter's debilitated in Capricorn, but speech potentially would be a source of gain. So maybe your career is related to you speaking, for example. Jupiter also represents children, so maybe the second house is you have gains through children. Maybe your children are very wealthy and they support you. That's a possibility. Um, so you can see how, depending on what planets are here and their condition, how that might work. The other things that typically when I see charts of people who have very strong second houses, they might be somebody who's known for their face or their voice. Somebody like an actor or singer, maybe a lawyer, that sort of thing. The second house can also reflect enemies, and we do have usually the sixth house is related to obvious enemies, and the 12th house is related to hidden enemies. This may not be used as frequently, but it might be a reflection of the eighth house, which is also considered a negative house and related to things like death and bankruptcy and chronic disease and things like that. So it might be things, rather than enemies, it might be things that detract from wealth. That might be a good way to look at it. And then again, if somebody has a very strong second house, or if the planets um, in their second house, related to their second house, are also related to the career, then you might have somebody who has a career that's based on math, economics, finance, or things like the face and voice, like I mentioned, actors and singers, things, careers related to food, like maybe a catering business if they also were an entrepreneur, and things like clothes and adornments, because again, those are all things indicated by the second house. All right, so there you go. So that was the second house, second Bhava symbolism, as far as Vedic astrology is concerned. As always, I want to thank you for your time and your interest in my work and the channel, and also Vedic astrology in general. So, if you're interested, I also do personal birth chart readings on Zoom. If that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. I also have another YouTube channel on natural medicine that includes other Vedic arts like Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms of medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that YouTube channel is Nature Source Care. Yeah, so again, all of my teaching videos on Vedic astrology can be found in my concepts playlist. So, I hope you found this interesting and useful, and hopefully the information presented here helps you navigate the energy cycles of your life. So until the next one, take care. Namaste.